Now, if you want to discuss something, you can ask each other.
I really wanted to, if Liv is still about, I'd really like to talk about hawks for a bit, if that's okay. I really liked the discussion of hawks and the way it was working, but I was kind of wondering, I always wonder what like hawks would say to these kinds of sort of discussions, because I use him as a foil a lot as well, and he's really useful as a foil. But I guess there's sort of one thing that we might be saying, which is, you know, hey, look, hawks, you've got this kind of hierarchy, you've got this ladder, and you think it's harder to get to the top than the bottom. And hey, look, we can actually get some stuff near the top, or as you put it nicely, Liv, we can put it, you know, horizontal and get bits and pieces from all of it and build a nice sort of picture. But I guess I don't tend to think that the main thing to take from hawks is quite the ladder itself, but rather the thing he thinks that is leading, what makes him put things in the hierarchy the way that he does. And so, you know, he talks about, you know, the most human things. And I kind of think what he tends to mean by that are the most kind of idiosyncratic, the most contingent, the things that are least constrained by the kind of evidence. And something that often leaves me feeling a bit, something I'd like to feel better about when I hear talks like the sort of example you were giving of, you know, hey, we can do this really cool reconstruction of the sort of ritual practice. You know, so for instance, hey, we can tell that they're being like, you know, interned kind of as if they're alive, you know, they're being, you know, put in these sort of human positions and this kind of stuff. I'm like, cool, cool, cool. But what did that mean to them? What did they believe about these things? What did they, you know, and so Hawkes is, of course, always referring to, you know, what you're doing when you're doing archaeology that's text aided, right? If I've got some like bits of myth or bits of like old stuff written around, then I can get to what they actually think, what they actually believe. And often when I see this kind of what he would call sort of text-free attempts to get at ritual, it ends up being like, and I want you to tell me I'm wrong, it ends up feeling like quite thin, where you say things like, they thought, like with, take the dog example, they thought the dogs were important and maybe were kind of like, maybe like people in some sense, but it's very, very hard to go to actual, the sort of richness of what you might go to get. So I kind of wonder whether there's a sense in which that view that Hawkes has, where there are these really contingent, really unconstrained aspects of kind of human belief and those sorts of things, that it is just really, really tricky to say anything about. Not that we shouldn't try when you're doing that sort of thing. So I wonder what you make of that.
Well, I mean, I think you have a point in this kind of viewing it more as a procedural like way of like, okay, I have these blocks and I'm putting them together, and then I'm putting this other block next to it, and I can build up. I see that point. I think that what is so important in this particular critique is that some things may be more observable than others, but that doesn't mean that they are more kind of primordial than the others. And I think that's maybe as an important thing to keep in mind when we talk about kind of from a more kind of ethnographic angle, if you want. So that would be my first point. My second point would probably then be to say that I think we are easily we are taking the veracity of text too lightly. I think that if we read what somebody writes down about the belief systems of, say, a medieval mortuary practice in, I don't know, like medieval England or something, you'll only catch a fragment there as well, but we take it as like scripture literally, in terms of like, okay, so this is what it meant. They believed in all of these kind of theological, sophisticated theological constructions that one person, probably a male, wrote down, like an upper class educated male wrote down. And so I think what archaeology provides is an opportunity to complement that perspective with ground up work. So I think that if we take it really seriously, that we don't have the interviews, we don't have the written history, we don't have the myth. So that's like myths and all of those things. And we also miss part of the rituals. We don't have the words that were spoken. We don't have the sounds and movement and whatever. If we make peace with that, and then we say, okay, that would be great to have. We don't have it. So what can we work with? What we do have is the materialized traces of practice. And then that becomes our way in my opinion. How can we take that really seriously? And I don't think that I would say that they say that the important thing is not that the dogs matter in a specific way. It's kind of like practice becomes really interesting when it's kind of banal, right? What did they do and what did they not do? And if we kind of and if we try to take that really seriously, we can see like, yeah, they treated the dogs kind of like they treated the humans here. Does that tell us anything? They buried their dead as if they are like intact. Okay, so you can say like, oh yeah, so that's like a very banal insight, but it's also fundamental. They don't, like in some other sites where I've worked, like dig through the grave systematically, because maybe there it's more important to become, and in very similar like hunter-gatherer contexts, it can become really important to where, okay, so the ones that I showed you were like, these were, they very rarely disturb old burials. There's something that's fundamental, like the proper burial is that you stage death, and the last thing you see is these people as if they are kind of, they still look like people. That's the last thing you get, and that's it. And then in other sites, you have them dig through and disturb old burials like systematically. Maybe there it's more important to become part of that place than it is to protect the integrity of the body of the dead at that stage of decomposition. What you know, so it's these observations that may seem super small, but I still think they're a lot better than somebody who just says, oh yeah, they put ochre in the grave, it's red, that must mean life, you know, because that's like the alternative archaeology of death that we have to deal with. And so what I take from this is really taking the material, like the character of the archaeological material, like really seriously in all of its imperfect, you know, all of the imperfect characters, and just like say, okay, like what do we have? We have the traces of what people did. What can we do with that? And then try to push that to the max. And I think that it allows us to say more without kind of like I think we do, if we do that carefully, we eliminate a huge part of the more problematic speculations that are just kind of like, I'm feeling that this might mean this, or like meaning is not important here, because meaning arises from practice, and it can be different even if we are carrying out these rituals right now. If you and I go do something, we can take with us different ascribed meanings to what we did, but we had the embodied competence of carrying out the ritual the same way, and we experience something from it. So that's like the level where I get, and I accept that. I think it's super interesting. But yeah, it's not an ethnography in that sense. It's a different kind of narrative.
Thank you, Connor.
Thanks. This is a question for Arsham. Is that okay?
If he's here.
He's here, and this is within the scheme. So it's the I was wondering, some of the things, this may be an old book, so it might be not, but some of the things you were talking about when dealing with systematics reminded me that Gould in the structure of evolutionary theory talks about historically unity of function and unity of type. I don't know if these terms they're kind of historical terms that he uses to describe a kind of contrast between Owen's perspective and the perspective that Darwin kind of introduces in terms of functional kind of discernment of where the structures of lineal descent come from. And I'm wondering, and there's been talk about his thought is that it anticipates Hox genes and MADS genes and things like that you have these constraints. I'm wondering if that's something that you've been assigned, or you're not. It's just it hasn't come in your biological training. It's just maybe Gould is not something that he's not closely considered anymore or something like that. It was just a question that came to mind. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think the way that this has come up in the past 20 years or so, yeah, as you say, it's with the homology of developmental stuff. So, and mostly molecular developmental mechanisms. I personally think it does have explanatory value. So, for example, if you talk about Hox genes, if you talk about the BMP and Wnt stuff that I had in my talk, it does explain stuff. But I think what I found is that a lot of people who are more oriented towards the what you call the unity of type, what Gould is called the unity of type, as you say, a lot of people who are more into morphology are more strongly oriented towards that. And there does seem to be quite a bit of tension in there between the two camps, as there is. Something I've tried to do as part of my PhD as well. So this is what I was referring to as something that I could potentially discuss later in a future talk somewhere, is exactly this, like trying to find a common ground between these two things and kind of trying to see where the tension is and how we can solve that. So to have integrated inferences of homology. Hope that kind of answers the question.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.